4,000 years ago, the most advanced civilization on Earth vanished. So completely that for centuries, historians believed it was a legend. Their name was the Sumerians. They invented writing, the wheel, cities, law codes, and even the first schools. And then they disappeared. What killed them wasn't an army. It wasn't a plague. It was something so ordinary that you have it on your kitchen table right now. Salt. Before we talk about the fall, we have to understand the rise. Around 4500 BCE, in the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, a people began building the world's first true cities. Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash. These weren't small villages. Uruk had more than 50,000 people at a time when most humans still lived in mud huts. The Sumerians didn't just build, they invented. They created cuneiform, the first written language. They divided the circle into 360 degrees. They figured out how to make bronze, how to build sailboats, how to brew beer. And most importantly for their story, they mastered irrigation. They dug canals, built dams, and turned a dry desert into a breadbasket. For nearly 2,000 years, it worked beautifully. But there was a hidden flaw. The soil of Mesopotamia is naturally rich in salt. It comes from the ancient sea that once covered the region. When the Sumerians flooded their fields with river water, the water soaked in and then evaporated under the hot sun. The water disappeared, but the salt stayed behind. Then they flooded again. More water evaporated. More salt stayed. Year after year, century after century, the white crystals built up in the soil. At first, the effect was tiny. A farmer might not even notice. But after 100 years, the wheat grew shorter. After 200, the stalks turned yellow. After 500, the land turned white, like snow. Dead. Here is the tragedy. The Sumerians knew what was happening. They had scribes who recorded everything: grain yields, taxes, temple offerings. They could see that the same field that once produced 2,000 liters of barley now produced only 500. But instead of changing their system, they doubled down. They dug deeper canals. They brought more water. And more water meant more evaporation, which meant more salt. They were slowly poisoning themselves, and they couldn't stop. Why? Because their entire economy depended on irrigation. The kings built their power on grain surpluses. The priests controlled the water distribution. To admit that irrigation was destroying the land would mean admitting that their whole civilization was built on a lie. By 2400 BCE, the southern cities of Sumer, the oldest cities, were already in decline. Eridu, and Uruk saw their harvests shrink by more than half. People began to leave. They moved north, where the soil was fresher. But the north had its own problems. The city-states stopped cooperating. Instead of sharing water, they fought over it. Instead of trading grain, they raided each other's storehouses. The great Sumerian invention, the city, became a trap. Each city built higher walls. Each king raised a larger army. And all of that cost grain, which required more irrigation, which created more salt. It was a death spiral. Then came the final blow. Around 2150 BCE, the Akkadian Empire, a northern people who had conquered Sumer, collapsed into drought and civil war. The Sumerian cities briefly reasserted their independence in what historians call the Ur-3 dynasty. For about 100 years, it looked like the Sumerians might recover. King Shulgi built a great wall, reformed the tax system, and tried to restore the old temples. But the soil was already too sick. Documents from the time show that farmers were abandoning their land. The price of barley skyrocketed. Hunger became normal. And then the Amorites arrived. The Amorites were nomadic herders from the Arabian desert. For centuries, the Sumerians had looked down on them as primitive barbarians. But now, the Amorites didn't need to fight. They simply walked into the dying cities. They settled in the abandoned fields. They married the starving Sumerian women. One by one, the great cities fell without a battle. The last Sumerian king, Ibbi Sin, ruled from the city of Ur. For 15 years, he watched his empire shrink. Food prices rose so high that people sold their children into slavery. The canals broke and were never repaired. And in 2004 BCE, Ur was sacked. Ibbi Sin was captured and led away in chains. The Sumerian language survived only in temples, spoken by priests who no longer understood the old words. But here is the most haunting part. The fall of Sumer was not sudden. It took more than 1,000 years. Generation after generation watched their world get a little smaller, a little poorer, a little hungrier. They had writing. They had history. They could see what was happening. And still, they could not stop it. Because the problem was baked into their identity. They were the people who built the first cities. They were the people who tamed the rivers. To admit that the rivers were killing them would be to admit that their entire civilization was a mistake. So they kept digging, kept flooding, kept salting the earth, until there was nothing left. Today, we look at the Sumerians and think of them as ancient, distant, irrelevant. But here is the warning. Right now, 20% of the world's irrigated land is salt damaged. From the Indus Valley in Pakistan to the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia, from California's Central Valley to the rice paddies of Vietnam, farmers are watching their yields drop. And just like the Sumerians, we double down. We use more fertilizer, more water, more technology to solve a problem that we refuse to name. The Sumerians didn't disappear because they were stupid. They disappeared because they couldn't change. And change is the only thing that has ever saved any civilization. So the question is not what happened to the Sumerians. The question is, what will happen to us when our own soil turns white? Thank you for listening. If you want to understand how the past predicts the future, consider subscribing. The Sumerians left us their writing. Let's not leave only our ruins.